Hello, everybody. Howdy. I'm glad to have you here in this Foro Urgente. What now, Brazil? Roundtable analyzing the Brazilian election. Today is the 133rd year of the inauguration of the Brazilian Republic as a political regime, November the 15th. My congratulations, Brazilian Republic. And I, Marcelo, can say that I'm very relieved by the outcome of this presidential election. But you have a lot to discuss today. Why Brazilian society got so polarized, the risks that the democracy is facing nowadays, the challenge for the next government. And to address such important issues, you have four scholars here with us, and they'll be sharing this section. And we'll have Rosental Alves, holds the UNESCO Chair in Communication and the Knight Center in the Journalism at the Moody School of Communication. And the Rosental at the Moody School of Communication of Journalism at UT Austin. And Professor Rosental Alves is a veteran Brazilian journalist, moved to Austin in 1996 as the inaugural holder of the Knight Chair, and has been a leading voice in digital journalism in the Americas. Our second present is Adilson Cabral, is the LLILAS 2022 Fulbright visiting professor. Is a faculty member in the Department of Social Communication in the graduate program in Media and Everyday Life at Universidade Fluminense, Federal Fluminense, Niterói, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. His research focuses on relationship between community media and social political movements. And Andy Hunter is professor of government studies, comparative politics, with an emphasis on Latin American affairs. She has done in-depth work in military in Brazil and the Southern Cone, as well as research on social policy issues in Latin America, with special attention to the politics of education and health reform. Her books on Brazil include The Transformation of the Worker Party in Brazil, 1989-2009, published by the Cambridge University Press in 2010, and Eroding Military Influence in Brazil. And finally, you have Christen, who is director for the Center for the Human and Gender Studies at UT. She's associate professor of Africa Diaspora Studies and Anthropology departments, and her research focuses on engendered and Black state violence and Black community response to it in Brazil and the Americas, and her more recent comparative works examine the lingering deadly impact of policy violence on Black women in Brazil and the United States. Thank you all for being here to present. I will follow this order. And please, Rosental, will give you 5 minutes to address your introductory words. Be welcome, you all. Thanks on behalf of Brazil Center. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, I think I will start. I don't have anything prepared, but I want to make a few points. Starting with the fact that we salute the Brazilian democracy and the Brazilian institutions for the show of strength that it has, that they have demonstrated in this election, but not only during in the election, but during the entire period of the Bolsonaro administration, that has been characterized by a constant, persistent attack to those institutions and the promotion of notions of anti-democratic movements. So we ended up the election with this sense of relief, and also a sense of the desire to go back to normality. And I talk from the point of view of a journalist, right? And the point of view of the media. And I am a journalist who started his career in 1968 in the midst of the dictatorship, but not only that, in the beginning of the worst period of the dictatorship. So I was in a newsroom in Rio de Janeiro when the AI-5, the AI-5, the institutional act that suspended the civil rights and established the censorship that I subsequently saw in action. And then in my career, I covered military dictatorships all over Latin America for many years as a foreign correspondent. And during this period of Bolsonaro, what was different is that it was not a dictatorship, but it was almost like a campaign for a dictatorship, and a promotion of those values that we fought to get out of those anti-democratic actions that the dictatorship had. But the thing that is different for me, that I think that it strikes me the most, is that this desire of not censoring the press, but attacking the press as an institution, attacking the press in a sort of an institutional way, because what the dictatorships in Latin America in general, and even in Brazil did, was a sort of a on point, was saying, we are facing a threat of communism, so we need to interrupt the freedom of press. Here, what we have been seeing is that we don't need the press, and we, there is a process that all of those 21st century dictators or aspiring dictators in Latin America have this idea that I call sort of a disintermediation, that the technology—
1 minute, okay?
And the what's that?
To complete 5 minutes.
Yes, the technology and the social media, etc., made the press unnecessary, so they can talk to their bubble, and they can create this parallel world that you can see in the streets of Brazil today, in those pockets of protests in front of the military, asking for a military coup, which is unbelievable, but it happened. So just to wrap up, I think that we are going back to normality in many senses, but especially in the relationship between the press and the government, which will be confrontational. We have the PT has already its dissatisfaction with how the mainstream media behaves in Brazil, and we're going to have, but that is normal. What was not normal is people in the streets of London when Bolsonaro was in London screaming that journalism is dead. Or the kinds of attacks that are so destructive of journalism and media. So this is my intro. So thank you, and we
thank you, Rosental. You still have 10 minutes to deepen this analysis, important analysis. And now let me give the floor to Adilson Cabral. 5 minutes, okay? With the same dynamic, okay, Adilson? 4 minutes, I will let you know.
Okay, Marcelo, thank you very much. I'd like first to thank you for this gathering, this important event in relation to what's next in Brazil, and also thank Paloma for this organization. Like also to thank Christen and Wendy, Professors Christen and Wendy. Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure as visiting scholar here only for this fall season. And I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts in relation to what's going on in Brazil right now, and then the expectation for the next years. First, my area, my field is related to communication policies, so I'll try to make this balance related to communication policy. But now for this first minutes, I'll try to focus on the Brazilian policies and politics and what's related right now there. First thing is that we are facing since the end of the election what we call like the third round related to the protests of the ones that support Bolsonaro in relation to the articulation that supported Bolsonaro since the 2018. And they are in streets, they were in the holds, and then after public pressure and pressure also from the institutions, not only Bolsonaro and the Ministry of Defense and the chiefs of the military forces, they came into to the public to say that there were such kind of protests that are unconstitutional, but they didn't were against the common protests or what they call possible democratic protests everywhere. So there are many people in some countries in Brazil right now protesting and claiming for the military forces to calling for another election or calling for an intervention in relation to the results of the election, which is unconstitutional. But at the same time, the military forces didn't come to the public, and then the official institutional declaration that they have, they are not against the claim of these protests, that is intervention or another election, etc. They were not so clear in relation to this. So this is a main problem in relation to the election. But at the same time, we have a process right now where Lula government and Lula's articulation, Lula's huge bloc that supported Lula's campaign is being structured right now in relation to the next mandate. And then there are interesting things in relation to it. There was a huge bloc from left to
1 minute, okay?
Okay, to center right-wing supporters in relation to parties, in relation to even candidates on the first round, digital influencers, and all the oppositors in relation to Lula, in relation to the Mensalão and Petrolão project, and also supporters no, the creators of the Plano Real in the middle of the 90s, they are now supporting Lula. So there is an institutional mobilization to support the election, the Lula's election. And then the important thing is that there are many issues related to the next government going on right now in relation to the transition from Bolsonaro government to the others. So I think it's this movement won't be strong enough to make some intervention. Their claim won't be successful, but at the same time, this movement will. We're going to see this movement during all the Lula's mandate. So the situation is not that good in Brazil as it could be.
Thank you, Adilson. You have time again to deepen this first part, and let me invite Wendy Hunter to address her comments. You're welcome, Wendy.
Hi, thank you very much. So I want to underscore what a truly big deal it is for an incumbent president to lose in Latin America. This rarely happens. And when you look at Brazil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso won re-election. Dilma won re-election. Lula won re-election. For you to lose as an incumbent president, especially after all the rhetoric and bluster and the alarmism, is a very big deal. You can also say, well, he did a terrible job, so he should lose. However, when you look at the federal money that Bolsonaro spent in the last 6 months, I think it really needs to be underscored that flooding the Northeast with federal money, basically all the fuel subsidies for the truckers, it did not work. So I think we need to really focus on the it did not work part, because it's a big deal for an incumbent president in a federal system where controlling federal money is generally thought of as being very powerful. So I think part of the not working is the Electoral Commission did a very good job at closing down any possible effective protests. The elections were held on one day. Within 3 hours of the polls closing, they had a result. The Arturo Lira came out and said, basically, I accept the result. The military did not protest. Joe Biden called him that night, as did many other world leaders. This left no room for Bolsonaro to try to engage in his antics and find any extra constitutional support. So it was clean, it was decisive, and I think the US needs to learn a thing or two about how to run an election. One thing I do want to say, though, is this cannot be viewed as a resounding victory for the left. It was not. People voted for Lula not because he was a leftist president or even a pechista. Being a pechista worked against him. They voted for Lula partly because he was not Bolsonaro, but also because he was able to successfully leverage his 8 years in government, the fact that he did a very decent job, and he never ceased to remind people that he left with 83% popular approval. But a big leftist victory, this is not. It is not, because when you look at the Congress, only 24% of the Cámara of Deputados is ideologically left. It is even a smaller percentage in the Senado. The other thing is, if you look at the governors, a lot of the big Bolsonarista governors won re-election, or they won for the first time in major states. So this will lead to difficulties in government, but again, it should not be looked at as a big victory of the left. In fact, Lulismo trumped Pechismo here. The PT did not do particularly well. The PT will only have 4 governorships. They are all in the northeastern states. What I think we need to be concerned about if we want a center left in power is a post-Lula PT is in trouble unless it renovates. In fact, they have good candidates in the Northeast, but they are increasingly a regional party. And the Lula vote,
1
Lula
minute.
did not win by running up the score in the Northeast. He won by making some inroads into big important states in the South and Southeast, and even Minas. However, there is no post-Lula candidate. The PT needs to cultivate someone to take the place of the standard bearer for 40 years, because what we're seeing is the popularity of the person is much greater than the popularity of the party. And so I think that's where we need to go in round two. This will be very hard under the next 4 years, though. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And let me now invite Christen Smith to address her comments about the Brazilian presidential election results. Be welcome, Christen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to us today. And also thank you to my colleagues for allowing me to be on this panel. I want to just, I think everything that's been said really maps out the landscape quite clearly, but given the focus of my work, which is on kind of the popular experience of working class Black people in Brazil, I really want to talk about the implications for this recent election on not only the Black community, but on marginalized communities, indigenous communities in Brazil, and what we need to be looking out for. I really appreciate what Professor Hunter just said about the Northeast and about the challenges that this administration is facing. I think that as I speak to people in Brazil about the election that just happened, everyone was relieved by Lula's win, but also extremely apprehensive about what happened in the lower elections, because they definitely indicate a strong push to the right. And I think we would do ourselves a disservice to not recognize that this is a mixed moment. It is a moment where Lula is kind of saving democracy for all intents and purposes, but the mandate by far has been in the favor of people who support Bolsonaro. And so what do we want to do with that? And I think that the crisis of the PT over the past decade or so, or even more than that, is something that we need to be concerned about. I also hope, I'm hopeful, although I'm also hesitant, that some of the issues around race in particular that made the previous administrations of the PT put those previous administrations in a precarious position are going to get addressed this time, namely and specifically the true integration of Black and Indigenous people into the actual political leadership and not the symbolic cultural leadership of the new government. And I think that is something that was a tension up till now. It has been a tension. I think much like in the United States, in a lot of ways, the Black movement vote has been taken for granted because people kind of assume that the PT is going to carry the kind of Black left and the Black movement vote. And that has been the case because there has not been much of an option. That being said, people have been disillusioned with the fact that, during the Lula administration, and the first Lula administration and the Dilma administration, despite many of the gestures towards racial inclusion, the actual public policies did not address major issues like police violence, right? And we saw an uptick in police violence and have seen a steady uptick in police violence in Brazil over the past 30 years, despite the fact that we've had these leftist administrations. And so I think that we need to be paying attention to how the left can court back the working class, recognizing that the working class is majority Black, and non-white in Brazil, and really start to think seriously about what policies and discourse changes are necessary in order to make this administration successful and not alienate its base. And I think that that's, to me, one of the things that really needs to be discussed. Yes, it is the case. I mean, I think that the popular, and Professor Hunter mentioned this, I think the popular notion is that the Northeast carried Lula, despite the fact that there is indication that it's because he won unexpected places that really pulled it out for him. That being said, I think we would be remiss to not recognize the overwhelming support that he received from working class people in the South.
1 minute.
And that is alarming, and that is something that we need to think about and we need to address. And I'll just talk more about it when we have more time. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can't hear you.
Sorry. Paloma, I'd like to see if you have any question from the listeners. And if you don't, I will, because my idea is to, if you don't questions from the internet, I will ask you some at the end of your presentation. Now you give 10 minutes, okay? And so in my last, during the Christen presentation, I made a little mistake. I did not press my timer, and so I hope you use it well, 5 minutes, but I had this issue, but sorry about that, not always you remember, but I have it open, and so I'll give you 10 minutes, okay, Rosental, to deepen your presentation. Let's see if let me set my timer. Okay,
yeah, okay.
So go ahead.
I don't have a presentation, but I can react a little bit about what Christen and Wendy said. I think they are totally right. I mean, the country is polarized as it has never been before. Lula did not receive any mandate. It is extraordinary that Bolsonaro becomes the first incumbent president that does not is not able to be reelected despite the legally doubtful, to not say illegal, ways of spending money like he had done. So the country is divided, and of course the nucleus that is Bolsonarista is much smaller than the amount of votes that he received. We have always, during the entire period, thought that they had about 20% of real Bolsonaristas and a lot of support from people who really dislike the PT and Lula and want anything but PT or Lula. So I think we have to take this into consideration. And I think Lula, who has been a negotiator, who has been a person who really know how to get agreements since he was a union leader, will understand that and has already shown signals that he wants to move towards the center. Social progress in terms of racial integration, etc., that Christen has been mentioning. We have Bolsonaro meant hiatus. I think Brazil was doing, even if you consider baby steps, but Brazil was moving, and suddenly, almost by accident, you have this guy coming from the fringes, from the extreme right, with the feeling a mandate to stop all of social progress in the country. he puts to take care of Palmares, a person who was against the recognition of racial injustice in the country. He puts in the environmental area a person who wants to passar a boiada, who want to destroy. I mean, we had a period in Brazil that all progressive things were targeted and stopped abruptly, and with with the support of the worst sentiments of the Brazilian tradition of racism and social injustice. So there is a moment of relief now that Lula and his administration will have to retake the roads that had been abandoned. What strikes me the most now are those people who are on their knees at this moment, or hours ago, in different capitals in Brazil, on their knees, begging for a military coup. I mean, that is unbelievable that in the 21st century we could see that thing. What also strikes me is how the general who was the health minister,
Pazuello.
Eduardo Pazuello.
How Pazuello was the most voted person in Rio de Janeiro. How did that minister who wants to destroy the Amazon because he does everything to stop the regulators, etc., is elected in Sao Paulo? I mean, and now I put back my hat as a journalist and say, I mean, the mainstream media in Brazil was always against Bolsonaro. I mean, there is, if Lula and the Lulistas were screaming in years past, o povo não é bobo, abaixa a Rede Globo. I mean, global television has been doing a great work, journalistic work, serious work, and even beyond journalism. The series that they have had in the main newscast of Brazil, Jornal Nacional, explaining the Constitution, explaining the importance, was so emotional. I was in tears when I saw a couple of that series. And despite all of that, I mean, Pazuello start manipulating I don't know if it was Pazuello or one before him, when they start manipulating the data of the Ministry of Health. I mean, the mainstream media in Brazil put a consortium of media together. We have never seen this done before, and start collecting raw data, because we could not trust the data of a president who was a denialist and was, saying that the COVID was nothing. So what I want to express is my feeling of what's wrong with us journalists, or what is wrong with the people who are not listening to us. And I think the media ecosystem that has been created, that I was mentioning before, that allows the creation of those bubbles, I saw are really being so dangerous to democracy and to any effort for social justice or for political advances in our countries. not only there, here too. You see that journalism has a big challenge now of explaining, for example, what journalism does. I mean, people don't really distinguish anymore an information that comes from a reputable source that is professionally using methods and process to get to that point, and any information that they get on WhatsApp, etc. So anyway, I think that now with the new government, we have already started seeing anger from the left against the media. So when I saw that, I said, that's fine. That's normal. The media, a good journalism is always bothering and creating some discomfort to the powers of the moment. But still, the fact that Bolsonaro was spread. The fact that he had this so-called hatred cabinet or hatred office, where lies and campaigns of disinformation were brewed, and this is well documented. It's going to be a continuation now, but the difference is that he's going to be the leader of this right in Brazil, and let's see how the government, the institutions, that is another thing that Wendy said that I think very right. That I was mentioned to how the institutions worked so well and so fast in a way of stopping any attempt of a coup that we suspected that Bolsonaro wanted. Stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosental. And so let's listen to Adilson. 10 minutes.
Okay. So my first round, I would comment some things related to Wendy's comment, because we really had a process, an election process that's very democratic. The vote is mandatory. It's a big difference in relation to the US election process. And the vote is there's an election day that's different, very different in relation to the election process in US. And the electronic vote that is contested by Bolsonaro and Bolsonaristas, it worked well during many elections and supported by some institutional forces that followed the process. Even the report of the military forces, this report didn't mention any problem in relation to these elections. They were not they didn't have a result, offer results in relation to the process at all. So they sent suggestions in relation to next elections and in relation to the improvement of the process, but they weren't against the process. They didn't mention any problem in relation to the elections. So the protests in the streets and in the beginning, also in the roads, they were related to the questioning the results of the election, but they moved to the idea of military intervention in relation to a possible communism in progress in Brazil, based on a mix of disinformation and hate speech. And so there comes the media, and it's not a disagreement with Rosental, but the traditional mainstream media in Brazil supported not only the coup against Dilma, but also supported Bolsonaro in 2018. So it was a problem in relation to the process because media also always supported some candidates that were close to the market forces. So as they are right now bringing some criticism against the Lula's projects on bringing the needs of rearrangement of the budget for 2023 in relation to some investments, to some budget for social areas that Bolsonaro's budget didn't cover. So it's very important right now in Brazil because the media criticism is against Lula, and there is a meeting right now from a business people group called LLILAS that's going on right now in New York that bring to New York some of the ministers of the Supreme Court and also some people from this government and the next government to Henrique Meirelles and Pécio Arida. They are right now in New York expressing their feelings in relation to not only for the future government, but for the discussions that are going on right now in relation to the transition process. And so media is bringing back the discourse, the speech related to mainly to the Dilma's government, and then making this balance in relation to the equalization of the finances in relation to the need of social investment. So this is one of the problems that we have to deal because the opposition that's far right-wing, they are in the streets, they are questioning the process and the emerging communists, and then making some, dealing with some ideas that are out of the border. But at the same time, there are many criticism in relation to the media and also in relation to the Congress people that were elected in this election, now that 2022, especially from the Senate, because we had some people elected like Damares Alves, Marcos Pontes, Ricardo
Salles,
thank you, that were elected in this round for Eduardo Pazuello as a deputy, that will be there at the legislative forces, keeping the legacy, the heritage of Bolsonaro government. And we have to also keep in mind that Lula was elected only because he had a huge bloc alliance from left to right wing. His vice president is Alckmin, that was an opposite, was a candidate against himself in 2006. And then these forces, like the Avengers, they have to get united against the Bolsonaro forces. We don't have, we are not a bipartisan, a bi-party structure, political structure. But in this election, it was very clear since the first round that a great alliance, a huge alliance has to be done. And then Lula was right since the beginning when he invited Alckmin to this to be a vice president in his campaign. Alckmin moved. He went out of the party where he was the last right-wing party that was PSDB, and he is from a party that's left-centered. That's PSB, Partido Socialista, like Brazilian Socialist Party, and they are beginning this process, and then they have to deal with this kind of problem. Not only media, traditional media in relation to this kind of arguments that are more close to the market forces, but also the hatred cabinet that Rosental mentioned in relation to keep alive this movement, not only in the streets, but also in the Congress and in the media, the social media, and the many chains of WhatsApp, Telegram, and then this deep web. But at the same time, in 1 minute, Lula is beginning another government that's very important, and then Brazil is back to the scene, and they that are involved in this new government, they are trying to show it to the world, not only the climate summit in relation to this COP27, but also the summit of the G20, in relation to the perspective of having an indigenous people ministry that Lula has announced. Also, the announcement of a national authority for climate, which is very important because it's not like a ministry, but a cross policy that involves not only environment, but social development in other areas. And then they will be involved in reaching this sustainable development goals that are placed in this 2030 agenda, and it's a lot of issues related to health and education that the government is trying to recover in relation to the times of Bolsonaro and also Temer.
Thank you, Adilson. Please, Wendy, I give you the floor.
Okay, so I think our hopes for the Lula government have to be really take into consideration all the extreme constraints he will be under. Lula is a very skilled negotiator, but in the past, he has negotiated with the benefit of money, and he is not going to have much money to basically grease the wheels in Congress. So that's going to be a really big difference. There will be no Mensalão #2, which is how he got some things passed. Why? Because there will be increased scrutiny on his government. So I don't think we can just look at the past and think he can transfer it to the present. It bears repeating that many analysts think if the election had been held 2 or 3 weeks later, Bolsonaro might have won. So Lula really is dealing with on the basis of very thin ice. One thing I want to mention, because people have been talking about, the future of the party and the need to look at organized workers. One problem of the left and of the PT in particular, as a party that came out of unionism, is manufacturing in Brazil is way down. and agribusiness is way up. This structural shift in the Brazilian economy tilts increasingly against the PT's original industrial base in the Southeast. This leaves them without a union anchor except in public sector unions. Industry now accounts for 10% of GDP. This is down from 26% in 1993. Agribusiness is an increasingly important part of the Brazilian economy. It is up to 28%. Why is this important? Lula is going to have to work with these people. You have to work with a group that represents an increasingly important part of your economy. So it's not just that there's a voluntarism, oh, I want to save the Amazon. It's that, okay, these people are funding the bill and they are in Congress big time. How are you going to work with them? And if you want to elevate the Workers' Party, you've got to have some workers. You're not going to have workers if you don't have an industrial base. So I do think part of this is much, much deeper than people are recognizing right now. And it even has to do with the changing structure of the Brazilian economy. The PT needs to find a way of staying important when it does not have federal power. Lula won the 2006 election as big time as he did because he used federal power to build a base in the Northeast. Bolsonaro's biggest political mistake was not to leverage resources to build a similar base. Yeah, you can, make lots of noise through WhatsApp. You can do this, you can do that. He got votes at the last minute through throwing Auxílio Brasil and Auxílio this and that at the Northeast. It did not carry him. But we did see that people changed their vote towards Bolsonaro when they got the Auxílio. Mm-hmm. So it really does pay to have federal power. The PT has to find a way of remaining strong in the opposition. And so I think this is a very important point. Lastly, I have 2 points. If you look at why Bolsonaro was elected, he surfed a wave that came together at the same time. Corruption of the PT, the worst economic crisis that Brazil had been through in 50 years, and rising crime. The PT has a handicap. It has got to find some sort of way to cut into the Brazilian voters saying, we don't want the left in power because crime goes up under them. This has been a handicap of the left all over Latin America. I understand it because they are the victims of police and human rights violence under the military regime. But you can't just say crime doesn't matter. It does matter. That's why people vote for the right wing. Now, do they do anything about it? Not in the way you would like them to, as Christen has brought up, but they get credited with law and order. And Bolsonaro went around saying, oh, murder rates were reduced under me. Yeah, not because of him, because of COVID and because of the governors. But crime control is going to be an important, whether they do it through prevention, rehabilitation, reformed policing, whatever. The PT is going to have to deal with that, or they will get caught time and time again with this, like in this country, the left is soft on crime. And then finally, I'm not sure that Bolsonarismo will remain as strong as people are saying. Bolsonaro's sons just got Italian visas. If I were them, I'd buy a one-way ticket to Italy and stay there, because I'd be very surprised if someone doesn't go to jail. So all these people out in the street, you have to remember they're organized. They're unorganized. If they can't find an institution to latch onto that goes along with their antics, I'm not sure they're going to remain as strong as people are saying. So that's my question.
Have you finished, Wendy?
Do I have time left?
Yes, yes, you still have 3 minutes, and you have 10 minutes, and in my
Okay.
time you have 3 minutes and 35 seconds.
Keep
Go ahead.
going.
So I think the role of the military needs to be looked at. Bolsonaro filled the cabinet with military officers. They were even in secondary positions. There were more military officers in the cabinet under him than were under the military regime. These people are not just going to go away.
Yeah.
So I'll be very interested to see at how Lula deals with them. They gained a lot of power in the bureaucracy. Yeah, I know, but there isn't as much anymore. So I do think it needs to be underscored that they were not interventionists. They didn't go along with some of Bolsonaro's crazy ideas, but they're not going away either. And so, because in no bureaucracy ever in the history of the world have you seen a group gain a lot of power and then be happy to lose it one administration later. I'll be very interested to see how Lula negotiates with them. And I have very little doubt that Lula made it very clear in the subterranean communication before the election that he would not resurrect Dilma's Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I'm sure Lula made it very clear to the military they were not going to lose all their newfound conditions. So I'll be very interested in seeing how that all works out.
Okay, Wendy, you still had 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Okay,
I'm
the other thing
if you want to use it. Okay,
yes, I do want to use it. The other thing that I think is interesting is the PSDB PT duopoly is dead. Dead. This is what sort of kept Brazil equilibrated from really 1994 till the last Dilma election against Aécio Neves. This is gone, and with it, the center space is also gone. And so it will not be as easy to do the kind of presidencialismo de coalizão, bring in people,
now 1 minute.
deals, work with the center that is able, happy to be bought off, basically. This is not going to be as possible in a more ideologically polarized situation. So I would also look at this death of the PT, PSDB duopoly and the vacating of the center as being the part of the new Brazil and a new challenge within Brazilian politics. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, and now, Christen, please, you have 10 minutes, okay?
Thank you so much. I want to kind of build off of some of the things that Wendy was just talking about, and particularly thinking about the shift in the electoral base. And we would be remiss, I'm an anthropologist, and so I'm always engaging in social and cultural analysis, and we would be remiss to discount the weight of the evangelical vote in this election. And also the ways that the rise in evangelicism are reshaping Brazilian politics. And so that has so much to do with what we are seeing in terms of the swing to the right and the ultra conservatism, that I think we really, really need to think about that and talk about it. Specifically, as we're wondering how it is that the base is clamoring for a dictatorship, or clamoring for a coup, or clamoring for the federal government or the military to step in. Once we situate it within this kind of broader cultural trend towards a patriarchal kind of, for lack of a better term, patriarchal white supremacist, anti-queer, woman, anti-gender fluid, evangelical approach to how people want to build society, then that makes much more sense, right? It makes much more sense when we realize that people are actually clamoring for a return to a utopic, imagined past where everybody was in their proper place, right? And everyone was in their proper role. I always, every time I talk about Brazilian politics and particularly the Bolsonaro regime, I always remind people of just how abhorrent it is that we have had this president that literally ran on a pro-rape, pro-police violence, pro-torture, pro-gun,
Yes.
pro-murder platform. And that was resoundingly elected. And so I want to say that because I think that we also need to pay very, very close attention to the ways that a rise in sexism and misogyny in particular, right? And the rise in femicide in Brazil is an indication of that rise in misogyny, right? And a rise in racism in particular, and a certain kind of very insidious and the word that I want to use is escaping me, but a kind of insidious and violent manifestation of racism that prior to this point, at least in terms of public accepted narrative, was thought to not exist in Brazil. Right. And so for years, you had people talking about kind of racial democracy and cordial racism. We are not there anymore by any stretches of the imagination. And many people have also turned to the fact that one of the viral videos that came out right before the election was of one of the politicians, an elected politician chasing around a Black man in Jardins in Sao Paulo with a gun, right? And that being one of the many, many moments that people started to get very, very nervous about what was going to happen if Bolsonaro was reelected. We have seen an uptick in violence. People feel constantly threatened. There is physical violence that has been associated with Bolsonaro supporters in their rejection of the election results. There has been unprecedented violence. We can look at some of the protests that we were mentioned earlier, and I think particularly about the protests in Sao Paulo and the blocking of streets. But that also kind of brings me to part of the other thing that I'll talk about in a minute, which is what we can be looking towards in terms of hope. I think that on the flip side of that, right, we're looking at unprecedented racism. We're looking at a racism that's very, I won't say it's different and new because I refuse that narrative, but I will say that it is surprising to many who assumed that Brazil was not as divided racially and as explicitly violent racially as it has shown itself to be under the Bolsonaro administration. And so, you know, you're seeing all these things happening. And as we're trying to figure out what's going to happen over the next 4 years, I think we need to really consider what are some of the steps that Lula must take in order to mitigate that violence. And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier, primarily underscoring the fact that in order for this administration to succeed, it must do a better job of actually engaging with marginalized communities, particularly Black and Indigenous folk, and putting them in the center and putting them in power and giving them real political power, not symbolic, you know, Fundação Palmares power, but actually giving them the right to determine legislation, determine public policy, and shape many of the things that need to happen in order to somehow gut out or undo this very vicious rhetoric that we're seeing right now, right? Because it's alarming, and there's no accident. I mean, one of the things that Wendy mentioned before about Bolsonaro's sons needing to flee the country, I mean, we would be remiss to not recall the very clear and direct connections between Bolsonaro's family and the assassination of Marielle Franco. And I think that these are things that continue to haunt us and will continue to haunt Brazilian politics, and must be addressed and must be considered as we're moving forward. Recognizing all of that, I'm starting to see the ways that the political landscape has changed, and therefore might indicate an overall change in the possibilities for this new administration. So, for example, I was looking at the numbers for this. In this election, we have 91 federal representatives who are Black women who have been elected into Brazilian government, and 135 91 deputados federais. I was trying to avoid using Portuguese, but I'm just going to do it anyways because I don't know how to say it any other way. 91 deputados federais and 135 parlamentares negras, right? And that, in addition to another 5 indigenous representatives and 3 Asian Brazilian representatives. And so what we're seeing is a huge increase in political activism among Black Brazilians in particular, but Black women specifically. And I think that that's extremely important. And it is extremely important because it marks a shift in the political landscape in ways that we haven't seen prior to this point. And so just to kind of give everybody more context, that those numbers represent approximate about double the number of Black women in particular who will be in public office in comparison to the previous 4 years, right? So literally more than doubling representation. And there has been 1 minute, and there has been unprecedented push within the Black community in order to get people elected, in order to address racism and sexism within politics, and to push the envelope and the discourse in these regards. And I think that the success of that movement is absolutely critical to the success of this next administration. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Christen. Thank you all. Wonderful presentations. Paloma, do you have questions from internet?
No, I don't have any questions from internet. I have one after you go first, Marcelo. You go first.
Yes. Well, again, I'm really impressed with all presentations, and I believe that you cover a very comprehensive dimensions of the Brazilian reality. And I believe that I'm trying to customize the questions based on what you have addressed. First of all, I will ask the same question to Adilson and Rosental. Your expertise is media. And as Rosental has mentioned, we have something new in the Brazilian politics. The media has been a focus of, is under attack. The traditional media is under attack. And you see, and you listen to Adilson commenting that it is not a novelty. The novelty is where this attack came from. Traditionally, the left wing complained against the media, the traditional media, but nowadays it's the far right wing. And I would like to listen to you about how do you assess the importance of the internet, of the new platforms in this sense, and what the future of the media in the political Brazilian political regime. Wendy was a true lesson what she addressed about Brazilian politics. My congratulations. and she brought up several elements, but mostly two questions that it is not easy to find a specific question for her, but two questions in specific most concern me. First of all, is about Bolsonaro and his constituencies. For a long time, the last decade, you had that phenomenon called the Lulupetismo, in which Lula became bigger than PT and started creating a movement around him. And you have something similar nowadays about Bolsonaro, and you have a Bolsonaro and far right wing, and it is hard to understand who is the in the command here, because Bolsonaro is in his way, in his style, he's a populist leader. But at the same time, you see that you have his constituencies, in some sense, suggest that they go beyond Bolsonaro. That it's an autonomous movement with strong social support. And how do you think that it is possible to connect? Do you believe that Bolsonaro is closer to that Lulupetismo model, or do you believe that it is something new in which the Bolsonaro constituencies is stronger than the creator, Bolsonaro? And I would like to ask you, actually, it's this question I will address for all of you. If you believe that Lula will perform a viable government, considering all constraints that are surrounding him nowadays, economic, social, budget, and so on. And Christen, I did appreciate your presentation. You addressed an important aspect of this debate and how the marginalized community, Afro-Brazilian community, indigenous women are participating in this process, and you see an emergence of their political participation in political life. Maybe it is the actual novelty nowadays, the strong participation, the Black woman participation, the visibility in the political life. In 33 years of Republic, it's the first time, it's totally original in the Brazilian history. But I would like to listen to you about this dialogue that is far from easy between the Black movement or the Black woman movement and the left wing in Brazil. A lot of resistance, a lot of contradictions. In some moment, you can imagine that they converge and they will be converging around some common principles. But at the end, you understand a lot of tensions here. If you could address something else about this dialogue, I will give you 5 minutes for your final comments. And I know that I also have asked the question far from away from simple, but you have 5 minutes, okay? And before giving you the floor, let me acknowledge the fundamental participation, contribution that Paloma Díaz gave to that event. And I really, on behalf of Brazil Center, I'm very honored to have her support, and she gave a great contribution. Thank you so much again, Paloma. Okay, Rosental, 5 minutes, please.
Okay, so I may not even need 5 minutes, but let me try to say this. Of course, the Brazilian mainstream media is not leftist. Of course, the Brazilian media has been a pain in the neck for Lula for many years, and during this administration, etc. The Brazilian mainstream media supported the coup d'etat in 1964 unanimously, but the Brazilian mainstream media, or part of it, a substantial part of it, also reacted against the dictatorship later and suffered with censorship, etc. So, of course, the Brazilian mainstream media, well, some of the newspapers were suffocated to death, like the Correio da Manhã, O Estado de São Paulo, a very conservative newspaper, had, the poems of Camões instead of to show the public that they were being censored, etc. So there is a reason why the Brazilian mainstream media, being elitist as it is, was not supporting Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro clearly had an agenda that is anti-democratic, etc. I think when I said in the beginning that we are going back to normalcy, is that even for the conservadorism in Brazil, even for the right wing in Brazil, Bolsonaro was an aberration, was something that even I don't agree that the mainstream media in Brazil supported Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was elected despite the Brazil. If the symbol of the Brazilian mainstream media is global, I mean the Jornal Nacional interview that Globo had with that William Bonner had with Bolsonaro was confrontational as you could imagine. But anyway, I think asking towards the future, of course there will be some confrontational situations. There will be no honeymoon between Lula and the media. I don't think, but we at least go to a sort of a normal level, that we are not talking about supporting extrajudicial assassination, killings in Brazil, that we are not giving carte blanche for them to kill, devastate the forest, etc. Those positions that Bolsonaro brought to the mainstream of politics in Brazil were not accepted, and we're going to go back to the situation that I think it's normal, with all the defects that it has. Another thing that I think is important to notice is the emergence of a new kind of media that is emerging in Brazil, with new kinds of digital media. We have been in the Knight Center involved in the creation of an association called AJOR that has more than 100 native digital media outlets that to be a member, those organizations, those news organizations have to be have to be in agreement with some ethical principles and professional standards. And we see, for example, much more diversity there, much more calling for social justice. We see, for example, in the favelas in Rio, in São Paulo, in the periferias, you see this blossoming new journalism kind of being created. And I think that this gives hope that the new media ecosystem will be much more diverse and much more committed with social justice, for example.
Thank you, Rosental. Please, Adilson, 5 minutes.
Okay, Marcelo, thank you for the questions. I'll try to keep it in 5 minutes because they are very broad. Anyway, the issue of big platforms is very interesting because it's related to the support of fake news and disinformation, and also the mobilization that support Bolsonaro in since 2018. we could say. And then there's a new need also for regulation in relation to exactly these topics of what we could call fake news and also disinformation and hate speech, involving not only regulation, not only the process of approving, discussing regulation, but mainly the commitment of the big corporations that support these big digital platforms. So the situation now is that we have an action from these platforms, Google, Facebook, and I guess there's another one.
Mastodon.
Twitter.
Excuse me?
Mastodon, the one that replaced Twitter?
Mastodon is the new one. But you want to say Twitter, right?
No. These corporations were Google from Alphabet, Meta from Facebook, and another corporation that send an action to the Supreme Court in relation to the
Telegram.
Maybe Telegram, I guess, in relation to the censorship that they are facing in relation to the Supreme the election Supreme Court in Brazil. So this commitment has to be brought into the scene, and then again, civil society organizations that are involved on it, and also representative forces that understand the idea that democratic society cannot deal with fake news and disinformation, and that these big corporations have an important role in this picture. They have to be engaged on it. And then it's a problem that we face because on one hand they support this project of making available and then to improve the many initiatives in relation to communities, favelas, etc., and bringing a more diverse environment. But on the other hand, they support also the establishment of such kind of contents. And then they also, and this means money also, because they support not only a digital alternative initiative, but Jovem Pan is a kind of group that began with the support of Google, and now they became like a traditional media in relation to the pay TV and radio also. Just like the idea to make a Fox News, a Brazilian Fox News. So the problem is that we are dealing not only with the new digital platforms based on social media, but also the establishment of the traditional media and also community media in relation to the small cities. I would like to just make some, bring some contribution in relation to the other questions. That is, of course, these media support the Bolsonarist structure. There is very connected in relation to military forces, in relation to landowners, in relation to police and security forces, justice forces, conservative business people, and also conservative churches, evangelical churches. And this makes possible the structure against not only Lula government or Lula next mandate in the basis of this huge alliance, but also the attacks in relation to the democracy. And then the viability of the government is related to the ability to equalize these contributions that make possible this huge alliance that reach the victory of Lula in relation to this last election.
Thank you, Adilson. And now let's listen to Wendy. 5 minutes, okay?
I think it's interesting that you, the way you formulated, in the case of the Bolsonaristas, is the constituency stronger than the leader? One difference, and you made a parallel with, Lula and his following, or maybe suggested the opposite. There is one very big difference between sort of Lulismo and Bolsonarismo. Although Lula is more loved than is his party, Lula has a strong party, and that strong party has stood behind him for 4 decades. It's important to have a strong party to kind of catch your fall, to keep you in the limelight, to give you an organizational base, notwithstanding the fact that Lula reached beyond it. Bolsonaro does not have a party in the same way as Lula does. The PL is not the PT. When you saw Arturo Lila, the body wasn't even warm yet. Okay, 20 seconds after it was clear that Bolsonaro lost, Arturo Lira is finding a way to kiss up to Lula. No petista would have abandoned Lula as quickly as some of these PL members abandoned Bolsonaro. So I think that's a really key difference between these two figures. It's going to be easier for Bolsonaro to kind of fall in between the cracks of history and dissipate than it would ever be for Lula, because I think the party difference is really important. I want to mention something. Christen mentioned the importance of the evangelical movement. Pedro Castillo in Peru is a leftist evangelical. He has no business being president, okay, but he is president of Peru. What was his magical combination? He's a leftist evangelical. There are certain sort of emerging leftists that have this sort of conservative social values with a more leftist redistributive bent. And in a way, that's very smart because you're kind of capturing 2 big bases. The problem with how it's divided in Brazil is you don't have a major figure like that. Well, you had potentially Marina, but she never kind of got above 19%. But I'm thinking, if I were to be a political consultant and look around at who might be a winning candidate, that is a combination I would look for. And that is my closing remark.
Thank you, Andy. And Christen, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Wendy, for facilitating my closing remark, which is, yes, give more power to Black women, whether they be Marina Silva or someone else. I think that your question, Marcelo, which was, how should we situate and locate these politics of race and gender and how they're factoring into not only this administration, but the future of politics in Brazil. And I think it is very, very clear to me and to many others that Black women in particular are realizing that they don't have to be relegated to supporting the candidates of others, the candidacies of others, that they can be the candidates themselves. And that is going to make all the difference. I think that it shifts the narrative, it shifts the nature of the conversation in the Câmara de Deputados, in the Senado, it shifts everything. And there are real examples of how it shifts everything up and down the political hierarchy. And I specifically think about some of the very tense conversations that are happening, that have been happening in the Câmara de Vereadores, for example, at the local level, where for the first time in history, politicians, white male politicians in particular, but also white female politicians, are having to listen to Black women who have been elected and are now their peers. And that has been disruptive for them. It has been disturbing for them, but it has also pushed the conversation in new directions. And I think that it's my hope that that will continue to happen, and that pushing will continue to happen. And that I think in many ways, the disappointment that many people felt, and I want to underscore, there's broad spread, there's broad support for Lula within the Black community, obviously, right? Like you can see that if you look on social media at all, when it comes to kind of Black left and Black public figures, Black organizers, militantes, like people are definitely in favor of Lula. But I think in many ways, just like here in the United States and in other spaces, folk have been seeing him as, the only option that's out there. And I think what happened in the first administration was that people got very, very frustrated because they helped him get elected. And then once he got into office, he did not deliver on many of the racial agenda things that he promised. And so I think that this time around, people are not going to let that slide, and they're pushing him already. And I think that that is something that's absolutely critical and crucial. I also firmly believe that in order for democracy to work, it has to be a true democracy, which means that all aspects of Brazilian society need to be represented, which means we have got to have more representation of Black people in particular, but also Indigenous folk, queer folk, women. I mean, the other thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that there are now 2 trans folk who have been elected for this next round. And so that's very progressive and moving in a different direction as well. And so I think that's the horizon. These candidates have to look different. And to go back to this question about, what is the future of the PT? The PT can't only be Lula. Everything can't be Lula. Absolutely. But I think that part of the reason why there's a leadership deficit is because traditionally the party has not looked to its non-white folk as potential leaders. And I think that has to happen. And in order for this to shift forward. And I'll end it there.
Well, I see that Paloma has a question for the group. Could you ask your question, Paloma? Mm-hmm.
We have been hearing for a while the US and Brazil mirror each other, considering the presidential styles of Bolsonaro and Trump. Yeah. And we had in US a really widespread of election deniers, which maybe normalize this factor. If I don't like the results of the game, then go and protest. And we saw so many people in the street protesting results. But I'm wondering now that what we're seeing here this week in US, the election deniers are not being elected, and Trump's future may look bleak now, even if he could potentially face justice for his crimes. Will that be also a final nail for the Bolsonaro movement? Will that have an effect there?
Well, in Brazil, the people who are asking for a coup d'etat, they are not denying the election. They just want a military regime. So and also, like Wendy put it in the beginning, the electoral system in Brazil is solid. The electoral system in the United States is a mess. It's so complicated, so anachronistic. Can you imagine that in the Silicon Valley, it takes days for them to count the votes? And this gives margin for this kind of denialism. While in Brazil, the system was under attack for years, and the system is so solid. It's not perfect, whatever, but it's so solid that it doesn't. It resisted.
Adilson?
I think just the,
sorry.
sorry.
No, go ahead, Wendy. Go ahead.
Okay, I think the way the said system is set up just does not allow for as much denialism of the result. Our system practically invites people to question whether the results were legitimate or not. Because all the rules, they're the different rules, it takes so long, paper ballots, digital. This is like a banana republic. So I do think just the technical way it's done ends up being very important for whether it even opens up some legitimate space for questioning the result.
Adilson?
Well, okay. I have to bring a joke in relation to the U.S. process, because Carla Zambelli is a federal deputy from Brazil, and she came to the U.S. in relation to a Brazilian agenda. But I guess she was the responsible for reducing the head wave in the U.S. Just kidding, because the Bolsonarists are against the red in our Brazilian flag, but here the red is the color for the
right.
Randall party. So it's a joke, but at the same way, I think that this it's important to say that this we have a kind of similar forces in relation to the U.S. Politics scene and the Brazilian one, but we have some kind of differences that make possible even the influence in relation to the institutions that we are having now in Brazil, and that we don't have in the same strength in the U.S. We have now a process that I guess you will come back to give a second round after these midterm elections in relation to the scandals of Mar-a-Lago and the post-Trump government, and also the scandal of Capitolio. But in relation to the Brazilian processes, we just finished the CPI, the commission, the representative commission of the pandemics, and we didn't start the fake news, the representative commission of fake news. During the process of the pandemics commission, Bolsonaro was reduced to less than 30% of improvement in relation to the society. So it's important to understand that the lack of continuity of this process of representativeness that was published to the main traditional media on pay TV, Global News and CNN were covering almost live the sessions in the Congress, and they stopped it in the beginning of 2022. Because the process of the pandemic commission stopped, but the fake news commission was about to begin just after the pandemics commission. And Bolsonaro was back into the scene in relation to the approval of some budgets like the Auxílio Brasil and the secret budget, the emendas de relator, that supported some of the deputies that have some strong bases that support Bolsonaro, not only in the Northeast region, but elsewhere. And
let's try to wrap up your final words, because we need to finish our event.
Not even 1 minute?
Well, yes, just try to
30 seconds.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I'll just end with this mention that Wendy referred also to the idea that Bolsonarism is not about Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is a piece, like a character, like a character in the picture of Bolsonarism. It could be another one, but Bolsonarism is about hate, is about disinformation, and is about this reality that's not augmented, this reality out of the border that we are facing right now, not only in Brazil, but all over the world. And then Lulismo, Lula's mandate's not only about Lula, but the huge force that supports Lula right now.
Thanks, Adilson. Christen, please. Christen?
Oh, I thought there was going to be Wendy next. That's why I was
No,
waiting.
Wendy, do you want to, because Wendy
Went first.
um,
No, I already
No,
went.
then
I already
Adilson-
went, but I need to go in like 2 minutes.
Yes.
No, and I actually don't have anything to add except to say that yes, Paloma, you're absolutely right. There's a broader set of patterns that are going on here, and I'm always really working for us to think against Brazilian exceptionalism and the ways that what's happening in Brazil is just in sync and paralleling what's happening not only in the United States, but also in a place like Italy. Then I think we need to really pay attention to this wave across the world and how are we going to situate ourselves politically moving forward? And I'll just say that.
Thank you, Christen. Thank you all. We had the big privilege to listen to 4 lectures this afternoon. On behalf of Brazil Center, thank you, Rosental, thank you, Adilson, thank you, Wendy, thank you, Christen. Possibly, we will have the authoritarianism and the risk that the Brazilian democracy is facing will lead us to organize several other events, several other Foro Urgente, like you had this afternoon in the next semester. Hopefully not, but we do not have a good reason to be optimistic in this regard. Lula term will begin surrounded by risks, contradictions, and limitations, constraints, and so on. But, well, it is good because you can get it. UT is a space, you have plenty of space to have this gathering, to reflecting about important issues of our current society, and mainly about Brazil. It is the main mission of the Brazil Center to promote Brazilian studies here on campus. And I'm sure that this afternoon event, really contributed to that. That's why I'm very pleased with all presentations. And thank you again, Paloma. And I state finished the Foro Urgente about the Brazilian presidential election. Be safe, take care. It's cold. Keep warm.